The growth largely came from thinking about the customer.
Hemant, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, glad to be here. So if you think of a customer who's booked on EasyJet, they're clearly traveling somewhere. I want to get a greater share of the travel wallet.
My guest today started his digital career at PwC and then moved into operations at EasyJet, where he doubled ancillary revenue from 50 million to over 100 million in under 2 years.
99% of the staff at EasyJet are focused on flying people in big metal tubes as low a cost as possible. And actually, that's not necessarily profitable. I describe working at EasyJet and looking at the years there as you need to count those years in dog years.
He spent nearly 20 years being parachuted into large, complex businesses and tasked with one thing: making digital work.
So many businesses wanted to go into digital, were not prepared to change the status quo too much. One of the biggest issues I found, especially with legacy businesses, is they try to replicate the paper-based process digitally, and that causes all sorts of issues.
If you're a founder or a digital leader trying to make a large, complex business move faster, then this is the episode you do not want to miss.
Because of that unique double price guarantee or double the difference guarantee, we've got a huge amount of free PR through all the national papers.
This is definitely staying in the final cut. Absolutely love it.
What originally looked like a mistake or a risky move ended up being an absolutely brilliant move, because
Every broken business you walked into, what's been the common thread for you? Hemant, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, glad to be here.
We've kind of swapped our tennis court, which is where we usually meet, to a podcast. Slightly awkward, but because I've always seen you in court. But yeah, it's nice to have you on the podcast, and definitely want to pick your brains. You've got tons of experience in digital. I was looking at your kind of LinkedIn profile and the number of businesses that you worked with. I definitely wanted to pick your brains. So yeah, fortunate enough to be playing tennis with you and now recording a podcast.
Well, hopefully I'll fire a few aces.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see what you got up your sleeves this time. But yeah, I think, do you want to maybe tell listeners a little bit about just kind of the journey that you've been on so far, kind of what makes you you? The journey is let's just say unconventional, because you haven't necessarily, you worked as a consultant across multiple organizations. So you get to see lots and lots of organizations from the inside, which I guess consultants are in a very privileged position to be able to do that. Love to understand more about your journey to date and kind of, how you got to where you've got to today.
Sure. And as you say, it's been unconventional, and I consider myself fortunate for having that. Effectively, I studied IT, went into IT, was originally a programmer back in the 90s, worked my way up to project manager, seeing clients, and I realized actually I enjoyed the business side of things more than the technical side of things. So throughout the rest of my career, I focused on more the business perspective or the client perspective, driving revenue and driving value for the businesses that I work for. So that's taken me through working for management consultancies like Coopers and PricewaterhouseCoopers, then EasyJet. And after EasyJet, I set up my own business as a freelance, completely unplanned. In fact, my whole career has partly been unplanned. And I was fortunate enough to just get contract after contract after contract. And I've recently decided to take a step back and semi-retire.
Amazing. What a journey. Yeah, look, we're definitely going to get into EasyJet because you've got some amazing numbers that you've done there in terms of growth. So I definitely want to pick your brains on that. So I guess, career spanning 20 years or so, 20 plus years, but lots of digital transformation projects along the way. Every broken business you walked into, what's been the common thread for you that you observed?
It's a good question. I mean, I would say there's probably, at the most basic level, two common threads. One is far too much focus on aesthetics rather than user experience. So, stepping into the customer's shoes, going through the journeys. A lot of execs don't even bother using the website themselves, or didn't used to bother using the websites or mobile apps themselves. So didn't really understand some of the issues or the frustrations customers would have. And then second is a lack of integrated marketing. So you wanted to get into EasyJet. I used to have big fights at EasyJet. I finally won the argument just to change the branding on aircraft from just EasyJet to EasyJet.com to make people aware that although we were an online-only airline, just putting the .com on was difficult enough. So just getting that. And then when I became head of ancillary revenue, I was really pushing to get our adverts to mention not just the flights, but the ancillary services available as well. So yeah, integrated marketing, I'm sure there are still issues these days.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think you're totally right in terms of people in charge of websites and apps actually spending time at a very deep level, understanding kind of what the user journey is like. And I think we have a saying is like within paid media, even ugly ads win. And so sometimes you can be really focused on making it look as slick as possible. And sometimes it's actually ugly that wins the race. Yeah, very very interesting. And again, EasyJet, I definitely want to get my teeth into in a bit more detail with you and try to understand exactly how you turn that around. Moving on to, I guess, there's a slide that I saw, which I guess if I was to summarize it, there was like three or four things on there. You had visitors, you had conversions, basket value, and margin, which kind of sums up kind of the e-commerce ecosystem, right?
Yeah, I call that my digital multiplier. All your KPI should be driving off those four things.
Yeah.
I'm happy to talk through those.
Yeah, I'd love to know more, and yeah, more specifically, kind of, is there something that's more important? Where do you start? Like, yeah, I'd love to kind of pick your brains on that
Sure.
particular slide.
Partly, it depends on the maturity of the business that you're working with, really. If you're a fairly small business, or you're not getting much traffic, you've effectively worked left to right. The model is basically, it's a multiplier, which is traffic, how many people are coming to your site, multiplied by conversion of those visitors that come to the site, how many are buying, multiplied by average booking value or gross value, which is, if of those who are buying, how much are they spending and how can you get them to spend more with you? And then finally, and largely forgotten, is margin. So when they are buying and they're buying your products, what products are they actually buying? I mean, I'm a bargain hunter, so if you look at if you try to profile me, you'll see that it's probably not worth maintaining me as a loyal customer because I often just buy in sales, which means margins are nothing or next to nothing, and that's not necessarily sustainable. So you've got to ask yourself, what can you do to push the higher margin products without obstructing the customer journey? At the most basic level, that's it.
Very interesting. I think, again, sharing my own experience and thinking about acquisition and traffic and conversion and sort of conversion rate, there's a lot of focus on that. But then sometimes it can become a kind of a loss leading exercise in that you're just acquiring and you're throwing money at the problem. And if your margins can't sustain that, then you struggle as a business. So yeah, totally sort of see where you're coming from. I want to get into the EasyJet. I think let's get that out of the way because it's such an intriguing statistic that I found, I think, on your profile, which was the journey, which was, I think you were there for about maybe 3 years or so.
I think just over 5.5, around 5.5.
5.5, right. Yeah, I stand corrected. So 5.5 years at EasyJet, and you moved the ancillary revenue from 50 million to 100 million plus in under 2 years or around 2 years. Love to find out more about that. Yeah, how did you make that happen?
So I describe working at EasyJet and looking at the years there as you need to count those years in dog years because that was such a dynamic business that whatever you experienced in a year, most people may not even experience in 5 or 7 years. So that business was growing anyway. I know you kindly credited me with transformation, but I'd probably say supplementing the business and helping it grow further. So originally, the ancillary revenue, let's define that first of all, which is any revenue other than the sale of the seat. 99% of the staff at EasyJet are focused on flying people in big metal tubes all around Europe at as low a cost as possible. And actually, that's not necessarily profitable. Where a lot of the margin is in the ancillary services. So selling baggage fees, credit card fees, selling in-flight catering, car rental, hotels, things like that. The growth largely came from thinking about the customer. And I used to have this saying, I want to get a greater share of the travel wallet. If you think of a customer who's booked on EasyJet, they're clearly traveling somewhere. So they're probably spending money from the minute they leave their door at home, go to the airport, fly wherever they're flying, spending money there, returning and all the way back. And we are only offering services, or we're limiting our services to just the flight. And the biggest challenge was trying to introduce integrated services or additional services and additional revenue without disrupting the journey, because the bread and butter of the business was the flights. The worst thing I could do was reduce conversion for flights. And where I explored that was effectively going back to those KPIs, trying to drive more traffic by trying to get more advertising and more awareness of the ancillary services, focusing on conversion where we experimented quite a bit. Often, well, originally it was almost just by follow-up email. You booked a flight, are you interested in booking a hotel, call us or come back to our website. We moved from that to dynamic packaging. So as the customers booking their flights, we would present hotels, cars, and so on through the journey in appropriate points and really carefully monitoring the progress to make sure we weren't risking conversion. And then trying to push, obviously, drive conversion and push margin products. So one of the most things that took me by surprise in that was one of the mistakes I originally made was thinking that I knew the customer. And actually, some of the customer behaviors I saw quickly led me to believe that A, I'm not your typical customer, but B, customers will surprise you. If I give you an example, we introduced dynamic packaging of car rental, and we were never a business-focused airline, just a simple low-cost airline. But on analysis, we made the assumption that if you're going to some city for a day or two, no more than an overnight stay, you're more likely to be a business traveler than a leisure traveler. And when we introduced dynamic car rental, so book a rental car alongside your flight, we originally thought of, well, EasyJet is low cost, so let's just put the lowest group of car available in. And we saw conversion doing really well with that. And then we actually thought, this is more of a convenience purchase than a value purchase. So we skipped a couple of car groupings and started to introduce, for where someone was day tripping or overnighting for one night, started to introduce higher group cars. And conversion actually maintained. So as a result of that, we got higher revenues and better margin on the higher group cars. So it's things like that, primarily experimenting, focusing on customer needs, and really analyzing the data.
That makes sense. Okay. And so I think one thing you said was that you were really sort of concerned with conversions, not dropping conversions as you're trying to sell those additional ancillary services. Any kind of mishaps around that, or things that you learned along the way in that journey where you tested something and you were like, no, this is actually having a negative impact, let's build this? Like, any sort of stories that you can tell us around where things didn't quite go according to plan?
So that's a good question. I've got an example where things didn't look great, but then when you looked at the bigger picture, it turned out positively. One of the challenges I had was we had a hotel partner and not Expedia. And if you think about it, everyone's selling the same hotel room. So one of the issues we found was that when we tried to do some analysis, this was before GDPR, we would find that customers would come onto the site, get offered a hotel, but then go off to Expedia to really get the better content on the hotel, and potentially even look at better prices. So we were losing conversion as a result because not everyone came back. And the biggest challenge was you're selling the same hotel room. It just depends on who's selling it, you or your competitors. And there was a reasonably healthy margin on that. So one of the tests we did was offer a price guarantee on that, which when it was originally proposed, went down really badly, saying, we're risking margin here. It's not clever. But I managed to convince the business to have do an experiment. And what we found was that the price guarantee actually helped with conversion because it gave customers assurance. And it also identified some issues with our hotel partner where their pricing wasn't necessarily correct. So on some occasions, and actually the price guarantee wasn't just a normal, we'll be the lowest. The guarantee was we'll pay double the difference, because I was really looking to differentiate myself from the competitors. If you flew with us to Malaga, you booked a hotel for, say, £400, and then you found it cheaper elsewhere for £300 or £350, we would actually give you double the difference back. So there's a big potential for losing money there. And in some cases we did. We had I agreed a joint marketing fund with the hotel partner to say these things are going to happen. So let's split the 50-50 the costs. We did. In some cases, there were errors in the hotel pricing, which meant that someone could get their trip completely free. And whilst that looked really bad, because of that unique double price guarantee or double the difference guarantee, the press picked up on it. And so we've got a huge amount of free PR through all the national papers talking about it and driving it. And whilst you thought, okay, look, I'm losing money and some people are getting trips for free, it almost resulted in a doubling or tripling of traffic to the website. And so drove revenue that way. And what originally looked like a mistake or a risky move ended up being an absolutely brilliant move because we ended up with much bigger business at the end.
Wow. Wow. What a story. It certainly felt like a risky move, but I think fortune favors the brave, right? So I think a bit ballsy there,
Indeed.
but it's sounded like it's paid off, and if press has picked it up, free marketing, free advertising, effectively, right? You literally can't fight for that. So very interesting. I've forgotten the founder and CEO of EasyJet. Heard fiery character.
The
Yeah, I don't know.
famous
Yeah.
founder was Stelios.
Right. Yes.
But the CEO, unfortunately, passed away recently. Was Ray Webster when I was
Right.
there.
Okay. Yeah. But did you have any did you have to go through, just sort of talking about this risky move? Did you have to get that approved with the board? Like, what were the dynamics like there? It sounds like I'm trying to dig for dirt, but I'm not. But any stories, any anecdotes from those conversations?
I mean, all I can say is that Stelios was a very commercial character and
Mm.
could see sense. I did need to go through various approvals for taking the move, so that was good. They were both fantastic people. Well, I guess one of the challenges was Stelios had other group businesses, so when we were picking for partners, he'd started Easy Car, and was looking into Easy Hotel, and there was always a push for integrate that into the service. But as fledgling businesses at that time, they wouldn't have been the right partner for us, and so we were fortunate enough for that Stelios was able to see that and look at the commercials and say, look, this would be a step backwards if we switch. But when they're big enough, it was something we could do. So that got a bit tricky at times. But
Mm.
as people say now, you let the data do the talking, um, and you do the comparisons of how much coverage there is across the network and so on. And made for interesting times, let's say.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing the stories there. Moving on to kind of the next question around digital transformation. You've sat in the CDO chair across multiple projects. When it comes to digital transformation, what can kill a digital transformation project?
Okay. Well, I've got a couple of things to highlight here. One is a need to maintain existing business processes. The way you might do something on paper and the way you might do something digitally would be completely different. So one of the biggest issues I found, especially with legacy businesses, is they try to replicate the paper-based process digitally. And that slows down, adds extra steps, data doesn't go across easily, causes all sorts of issues. The other thing I was fortunate enough not to get in EasyJet was conservatism. So many businesses wanted to go into digital, wanted to do digital transformation, but we're not prepared to change the status quo too much. You are not prepared to experiment and learn and try things, which digital is the perfect thing for doing that, because you can try things and you'll know immediately. You don't have to run a marketing campaign, wait for a few weeks before you get the data. You get the data immediately. So, you've got to be open to experimentation. Finally, especially for legacy businesses, is creative thinking around existing, say, limitations. If you're an existing retail business, you've got a current supply chain. And in the original days, that supply chain was one way. Primarily, you're taking goods from your warehouse into the retail stores. So there wasn't necessarily you had to be creative about things. An example I could give for a retailer that I worked with was they had bricks and mortar stores. They were looking to drive digital. They had a digital presence, and we were looking to make returns easier and move to more of an omni-channel model.
Mm-hmm.
And the solution we had to come up with, where a customer had bought online but returned in store, was to send those returns back on the passenger seat of the lorry, returning empty from having dropped off goods. So you can't do everything all at once. You've got to pick your battles, and some things you've got to just work around for. And actually, on that bricks to mortar thing, that reminds me of another big issue for digital transformations, and that is incentives. One of the retail businesses I worked at, there were individual franchisees or retail owners and area managers and so on would be KPI'd and incentivized on local sales. So when you start thinking omni-channel or digital, if there was, say, a click and collect, bricks and mortar people would be reluctant to support it because it's not supporting their incentives. So you have to rethink your incentives as well to make sure they're aligned with the objectives of the digital transformation and the business overall.
Very interesting, yeah. And I think the whole incentive plays is something that I actually haven't thought of. When you think about digital transformation, it's very much I guess at least in my head is, okay, our orders are not going to be people walking into stores anymore. It's going to be people, visiting the website or app or whatever it may be. But actually the incentivization side of things and the whole friction, I guess, between the retail world and the digital world, and how do you square them, and try and get the best outcome for the business, particularly if they are, I guess, franchisees, right? And it's not your direct store and they're not your employees. That can certainly hurt their business, and their margin. So how do you keep them happy? Any stories to tell? Any battles that you went into?
No, I think that was, I guess the returns one was probably the original. I guess also it's not really a battle, but it's a
Mm,
creative solution thing. I'm talking back in the 90s now. That's how
mm,
long I've been in the business. E-commerce originally was when you got an e-commerce order, that resulted in a fax being produced in a warehouse, and then the product being posted from that warehouse. So things have moved on a huge amount from there. But the battle, I would say, there was just the supporting the creative thinking. Because people were just so stuck in their ways. It was a real challenge to just get that done.
yeah, no, and I think that's a great segue to kind of my next question in terms of like people that have lived in that environment for a long period of time, and then all of a sudden you're asking people to think digitally. So you worked at Royal Mail, the AA, Arcadia. What does it really take to get people to start thinking digitally when their entire world and ecosystems being sort of analog, so to speak?
Okay. Well, I guess a couple of things there is highlighting to the exec team all the friction points that are there. Because often, if someone tries to, as I said before, one of the big mistakes businesses used to make was just try to replicate the existing processes digitally. And that
Mm,
would often result in huge friction points. A good example there would be a holiday business that I worked with. They had a common booking system, a booking software for their holiday homes. And that is used across multiple businesses, and some businesses are more advanced than others. Part of the process there was you needed to fill in, before you could book or complete your booking, you needed to fill in an email address so that for the advanced businesses, they could then sign you up onto marketing campaigns and confirmations. This business didn't need that, but still decided to force the email entry. And so you saw drop off there, sign up to a program, which then resulted in nothing. It just, things went into a black hole. And so highlighting things like that, where people thought, oh, we'll just replicate existing things, or making use of templated generic solutions. You use data to highlight what's working, what's not working, what you need to get changed, or what you can try and skip to make things as easy as possible for the customer. There's a few more things are for legacy businesses, especially, is proving success.
mm,
When you try and do something, the beauty with being digital is that you've got the data. So it's very easy, quick to share it and see it, play back a video of a journey and then show the stats to say, look, conversions here or issues are here. So you could really demonstrate success very, very quickly if you were in the right place and had set things up properly.
mm.
Creative thinking around the limitations. Again, you're not going to win all the battles, so you have to accept some limitations, and then you need to think about working around that. And then finally, is incentives again. Those legacy businesses, largely those incentives are going to be driven around legacy processes. And so one of sort of the common recommendation was to introduce some basic digital KPIs to support people and ensure people do focus on the digital business.
Makes sense. Again, any stories, anything that, any sort of situations you've come across where you've been brought into a business for digital transformation purposes and people just weren't ready. They wanted to stick to their processes and doesn't matter how hard you tried. It's just like they just weren't ready for that digital transformation. Has there been any situations like that?
There has been. I worked for Samsung at a European level, and there was a real difference in the maturity of the markets. So the UK market was actually very advanced, and we really enjoyed working with those guys. They were pushing boundaries, thinking creatively. But some of the other markets in some of the smaller countries in Europe were very, very rigid in their thinking. If you wanted to try something, run an experiment, it was very, very difficult to get them to do that, to allow that, because they were so worried about the risk to their business, risk to conversion. And so one of the things we regularly did was, rather than having a Europe-wide solution, which would have been quite difficult to do anyway. We would engage with the local market, UK or France or Germany, convince their local teams that this is something worth trying. There's an issue on their site that creates an opportunity for us to experiment and potentially resolve the issue, demonstrate that it works, identify it as best practice, and then share that best practice across the businesses. Trying to encourage the people, the smaller markets, to adopt it as much as possible. And then once they saw that it's successful elsewhere, they would take it on.
Interesting. So while you were handling I think the whole Samsung side of things is quite interesting because, again, you took, am I right in thinking you took e-commerce for Samsung from UK cross-border into other European markets, right? So you were spearheading that, is that right?
Well, I was head of Europe for e-commerce. There were markets, and what we grew was we extended the European footprint. The large countries already had websites for Samsung, and then we rolled out additional ones, as well as helping drive the growth of the current ones.
I see. And it was all based around the UK model. So UK was sort of seen as the success sort of story and case study. Is that kind of how you approached it, or were you pretty much, no, it's a new market and we've got to sort of learn what works locally, apply what we know works in the UK, but perhaps there are other things that we need to learn as well? It's like, how did the dynamic work?
There was a global basic framework that everyone would use. There was a term coined, I can't remember by who, called Globalisation. So you want to get something as global as possible because it just makes things easy to maintain. However, there's always going to be issues that you need to deal with or address to make things work. So you have some minor localizations that work. Examples I can think of there would be VAT settings. Allowing for, in some countries, some markets across the world, VAT is exclusive. So, for example, in America, if you buy something, there's sales tax on top, and then that sales tax varies by region. If you had something that was just, locked 20% VAT, that's not going to work when you take it abroad or to another country. There's also then when you go across, not really a challenge, but some of the things we needed to think about when we were expanding the European footprint was the risk of price arbitrage. So, if one market had the same product slightly cheaper, could someone order it from that country and then have it delivered locally? So there were things like that we could do. We had to bear in mind where that did happen. There was a grey market that resulted, and so that had to be very carefully managed. And then finally, things like end-to-end thinking. So when you do go into a new market, you may not necessarily always have a warehouse in that market. So you might use warehousing from another country, a nearer country. And so you need to think about, well, how would fulfillment work? How does prioritization of stock work? If there's limited stock and there's a high degree of sales from both markets, who gets the stock? How would returns work? And also then, how does customer service work? Because it's more often than not new language, new currency. So some of the markets were outside the EU zone. There's also, as you get bigger and more geographic, you get an increased risk of fraud. There was a lot of fraud attempts that we had to keep an eye on and monitor very closely.
Fraud in terms of online fraud, where sort of fake orders or something?
Fake orders, non-delivery, claims of non-delivery, use of fake orders through, say, stolen credit cards or credit cards that were blocked in one country but not necessarily blocked in another country. So all sorts of issues.
Yeah, no, very interesting. Love the word localization. That's going in the vocabulary. Brilliant. Cool. I think just sort of carrying on with the Samsung sort of chain of thought, one thing that's quite intriguing is obviously you were doing D2C, right? And you were doing D2C in all of these different countries, and you had, obviously websites there selling directly to consumers. But you also had retailers or retail partnerships, and you were selling it kind of B2B aspect, right? And they are somewhat competing ends. How do you sort of keep both parties happy? Because I'm sure, everyone internally within Samsung, the marketing team, the acquisition team will have targets. And then retailers want to sell more, make the money, make their margins. How do you kind of square that? Like, it seems two competing entities in some ways. How did that all work? And were there any frictions that you were dealing with, and how did you resolve those?
So I had to think long and hard about this because, as you say, that there is these challenge that retailers would be saying, well, we're not keen on your D2C website.
Mm.
But the proposition I came up with for those people was actually our market share was not dominant, really. It was good, but we had plenty of opportunities to grow market share. And so my common response would be, you might think I'm going to take the D2C is going to take your share of the pie. What you need to remember is by doing this and we consider all the other marketing actions that are being taken, we're actually looking to grow the pie. You may get, making up numbers here, if the retailer was getting 10% of 100 overall sales and we grew the pie to 150 and their share reduced to 8%, they were still better off because they had a bigger business in the end. And we still had the D2C channel growing. So that's how we would commonly overcome that.
Yeah, makes sense. Just sort of, paint the picture, I guess, is the long-term vision that you got to talk about, and just bigger market. And I guess TAM is something that we speak about, total addressable market. That already exists, and you guys only have X percentage, and you're just trying to grow the.
Yeah, I mean, we're competing with the with your competitors. So we're not trying to take the retailer's share, but we're trying to take the competitor's share.
Fascinating. I think moving on to something that's on my mind, and I guess it's more of a selfish question around kind of the relationship between agency and in-house teams. Presumably you worked, in-house marketing teams, you've also worked with agencies. Do you feel like there's particular aspects where, the relationships can sometimes break down between in-house teams and agencies, and what the fix might be?
So a common issue I've found was that a lot of businesses would treat marketing agencies as a supplier rather than as a partner. So things would happen in the businesses, strategy would be defined, developed, but actually the annual strategy process might get completed. But there weren't many businesses that I worked for where before I entered, where that outcome of the strategy process was shared with the marketing agency. So they weren't really treating the agencies as a partner. So that's one extreme. The other extreme is there are some businesses I've worked with where they were overly dependent on the agency. And often, if it was a smaller business, there'd be one or two people in that agency that knew, say, the web pages or the booking engine configuration. They were the key people for any changes that needed to take place. And then if those resources were moved on to other clients, because as an agency person, you don't want to be working for the same client all the time, that caused issues. So there was a high risk, and it's not always easy to find the right balance, but there are two extremes there. One is not treating your agency as a partner. The other extreme is having some really critical dependencies within the agency.
Is your view typically sort of pro-agency? There's a place for an agency to deliver value, or is your general thinking, hey, like agencies are great for a period of time, but you've got to build the skill set internally as much as possible? Like, where do you stand on that?
My preference has always been agency. I think you need a minimum core competence within the business, but you should supplement with agency relationships. And a couple of reasons for that is, as a business, your core competencies may not be the core competencies that an agency has and that your business needs to grow. So there's a ready access. Also, then for those core competencies, you've got to stay up to date. And digital is such a dynamic area that it's hard for small teams to stay completely up to date. Often when I was in a business, one of the things I would always ask the marketing agencies is to say, give us quarterly update meetings so that we are aware of things that are up and coming, which as a business, you may not have the time to focus on, but as an agency, they need to do that to remain competitive and remain active in the marketplace.
Yeah, totally makes sense. This answer is definitely staying in the final cut. Absolutely love it. Yes, I think that's just me being selfish, but what you say absolutely stands. Digital is a very, very dynamic place. Like, we struggle to keep up. I'll hold my hands up. I obviously own and run an agency, a digital marketing agency.
So one of the things I used to tell people whenever I went into a business, and the CEO would introduce me and say, "All right, this guy's a digital expert," I'd always say, "No, I'm not a digital expert. Digital is so big, so varied, and so dynamic that anyone who claims to be a digital expert is not worth talking to, because you just can't be that person."
No, absolutely. And I think that's a lesson that a lot of founders that I speak to of agencies, we often share stories and of, things mistakes that we've made. And certainly when I started candidly, it was very much like, we're going to stick to our lanes. We're going to do paid media and creative. We're not trying to do SEO, web development, email marketing, all the other jazz, and speak to a number of founders where they've gone, yeah, we tried that and it didn't work for that very reason. So yeah, you're totally right. I think coming towards the end of the podcast, if there are any CEOs out there, and kind of CEOs and founders who are looking for digital transformation or someone of your skill set, when's the right time to bring someone like yourself in, a consultant who can help with digital transformation?
I guess in my experience, there's been two key contexts that I've been called in. One is when a CEO or board realize that the business's ambition is above their ability, so that they, as a business or as a board, say, realize the business needs to focus more on digital or just become much more online. They've got objectives, but then they've tried things and they're just not getting anywhere. So there isn't the ability within the business to drive forward and meet the objectives. Or the things have been running for so long, they've been trying for years, and there's been just issues. My experience has been one of two things. One is easily a transformation project is started, but then within 3 or 4 months, they realize actually there's so many ifs, buts, and maybes here that it's not going to happen. So we need someone who can really drive this through. Or it's been going and the same program has been going on for 2 years, 3 years, and they've only ever seen incremental value rather than transformational value. So that's one area. And then at a more conceptual, strategic level, early on, and particularly with places like the legacy business I've worked with, they want to deliver a proof of concept and the staff are focused on the current business. So they need someone in to come in and prove digital works. Digital can be, say, a money saving or a revenue generating. And they need someone from to lead from the client side. Often they'll have a consultancy or an agency, but they need a client lead.
Yeah.
So
Drive that forward. Yeah, I think sharing my experience with something similar, I won't name the client, but that tends to be the case if there isn't a really strong internal leader who is really pushing forward with digital transformation of any kind, whether that's web dev or digital marketing or app development or anything it might be. You often find that actually, other priorities will start to take precedent. Things start to fall by the wayside, and you've gone 6 months into a project, spend a shitload of money, and really there's not the outcome that you were looking for, and you go back to the old ways and then pick up the project again 6 months later because ultimately it has to happen. So yeah, I think an internal leader is definitely, it goes a long way.
There are two things I often, if I'm meeting people exploring opportunities, if I come and work for you, my objective will be to make myself redundant. I'm not interested I wasn't not really interested in a permanent role. So my mindset would be completely different. People would be surprised by that. But, I wanted to go in, make an impact and move on to something else. And then the very definition of an interim, a good interim, is someone who's overqualified for the job. So what you want is someone who's been there, done it before, got the grey hairs, and can highlight, not just say, these are your objectives, yeah, we can do it, but highlight all the risks and say, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? Have you thought about the other?
Yeah.
So that's usually what wins in the end.
Makes sense. Makes total sense. Amazing. Last question for you. Nearly 20 plus years actually in e-commerce, retail, travel, finance. What's the biggest untapped opportunity in digital right now in your view?
So the easy answer would just be to say AI, right? And there are opportunities there. I'm not going to focus in on that. There's something that I've had a bugbear with for decades that I have worked in digital, and I see it as an untapped opportunity. But it's something that, given your business, you may not necessarily like. And that is, we are completely dependent on Google. If you look at paid marketing, if you're doing PPC campaigns, you have to pay the price of the Google sets, and there's no contracts may have a right of audit. I've never been 100% sure that those prices are genuine because you're always completely dependent on Google. And so, yes, they may well be and may not be an issue, But I think there's an opportunity, and it would need to work across the industry to introduce blockchain, because blockchain is validating. So if you could do blockchain and use blockchain to validate paid media, I think there'd be a lot more confidence in paid media and a lot more confidence in, say, the auction prices that you're getting from Google. Whilst they've got wonderful algorithms and it's good, they're in it to make money, and you need to know that what you're paying is genuinely what was there rather than what was stated. So
Yeah, no.
if someone wants to pick that up, more than welcome to. It's a huge challenge and an industry-wide one, and you'd need to get people across the whole industry working together to make that happen.
Yeah, no, I think I'll add my 2 cents worth in there as well. I feel like, so a lot of the searches are becoming zero-click searches on Google because AI mode's kicking in. People are finding the information that they wanted to find previously. You would have had, 10 blue links and you'd click through 5 of them to understand kind of whatever information that you're looking for. And therein was the opportunity for a business to sell you something because, you were doing a lot of research to be on a given topic. With AI and AI mode, particularly on Google search, you are going to get those answers given to you. And so you're actually never really leaving Google to go to the website. And obviously, if you're a ChatGPT user or Gemini or Claude, you are using those bits of information. Like me personally, I hardly Google stuff now. And even if I'm Googling stuff, then AI mode is kind of giving me the answers I'm looking for, right? So I think the monopoly of Google is kind of breaking apart a little bit with AI. And I think the user experience is so much better. Invariably, that's kind of where we're heading. ChatGPT has obviously already spoken about introducing ads.
Mm-hmm.
You're looking at, I think it's £100,000 to test ChatGPT ads. So it's not for everyone right now. Google, the ads model is really what Google makes most of its money on. So I think ads will infiltrate AI results invariably. But, although Claude's taken a stand where they're saying they're not going to do that. I don't know if you've seen the Super Bowl ad where they're like, we're never going to have ads on Claude.
Well, time will tell on that.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I think 5 years down the line, when those servers got to keep going and GPUs and all the rest of it, I think you're absolutely right. But I think long story short, the monopoly of Google is somewhat breaking, and then you also have Meta coming in, Instagram, Facebook ads, TikTok has also come in. You have Amazon for particularly product-based businesses. So I think it's a lot more diversified. But one thing I will say though is, it hasn't become any cheaper. The auction systems are auction systems. They are black boxes. You don't know exactly what's going on. You don't know what you're paying for. So whether it's CPC or cost per click on Google search, or whether that's CPM, cost per 1,000 impressions on TikTok or Facebook or Instagram, when you look at year on year, there's always an increase, right, for the same industry, for the same ad accounts. So yeah, I think it's almost a necessary evil, and I'm part of that process. I run a paid media agency, and that's what we specialize in buying that media at the cheapest cost possible. But yeah, I guess it's a separate podcast in its own right. But I guess the only 2 cents worth, if I was to summarize that, is that Google search monopoly is somewhat breaking.
Sure.
And it's kind of on its way out. So I think let's see how that plays out. What a fascinating chat, Hemant. Thank you for paying forward with all that you've learned over the last 20, 25 years, working across multiple industries. I guess before I let you go, last thing from me, where can people find you?
Actually, I'm not on the market anymore, so I'm happily semi-retired. So
if anyone wants to pick your brains, if they want to get in touch and just ask you questions. Yeah.
I'm on LinkedIn, but yeah, I tend to do mostly pro bono work now. So I'm starting to give back more and more.
Yeah. Anything you want to talk about in terms of that pro bono work, and anyone that might be able to help?
No, I'm open to more pro bono work if people want to approach me. But the decision making factor for me will be, there's plenty of people that will help you make more money. I'm interested in giving back to the community now, so I tend to focus more on charities and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think it's been great talking to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Enjoyable chat.